Okay, so in this demo, we're just going to sample a few basic APIs like the Instagram API, Google Maps, Google Places, probably the Meetup one, and show you how I leverage these APIs to enhance my sites. So for example, if you go to my home page on Turbo, if you click on this over here and go to the home page, you'll see that down here, this is the meetup we're doing right now, right? And this one over here is tomorrow's meetup. Well, this data is coming from an API, right? I did not write the code to render this content. It's coming from the meetup API. So I'm leveraging an API to render this content so that I don't have to, if I schedule a meetup, I don't have to go to my website and then code the corresponding meetup, right? That would be very cumbersome, right? That would be a lot of extra work, especially if I have to make a change or anything like that. So if I make a change to the schedule, it automatically renders here by virtue of the API. It's very convenient, very nice. Where else am I doing that? I'm also doing that here. Okay, this is from the Eventbrite API. So this one's on Eventbrite rather than Meetup. So I'm using the Eventbrite API for the same purpose. So it's very useful, very convenient, easier than coding everything by hand every time I schedule an event or make a change. So we're going to do some of this in our project right now to show how it works, and that's basically it. So first thing we want to do is open up the terminal and cd to your project directory, wherever you do your work. I'm just going to do this on my desktop. We have to install a couple packages. Everyone should have Node. Does everyone have Node? Okay. So we have to install Gulp. So go ahead and do that. You may already have these, by the way. If you do, don't worry about it. If you don't, do this right now. And it'll ask for your password and just type it
in. What's Gulp?
Gulp is called a task runner. It's what we use in Turbo, at least, to optimize your assets for delivery. So for example, when you have a CSS file, you might have like 4 CSS files in your project. Really what you want to do is you want to combine them into one. That's called concatenation, and then minify them on production. You don't want to have all 4 imports individually. You can do that through Gulp, among other things. So good question. Next one is Webpack. Webpack is similar to Gulp in this regard, so I'll just leave it at that. But it does a lot more, but it performs a similar functionality. You can think of Webpack as like Gulp for React projects. So it's kind of a gross oversimplification, but for now it's good enough. And last but not least, you will need the Turbo CLI. This is going to be our liaison to our Turbo environment where we can deploy our projects. So I'm guessing at least some of you have worked with Heroku. You know, when you do Heroku, git push Heroku master, Turbo CLI, similar idea. You deploy your projects using the Turbo CLI. Okay, so go ahead and install those. You should be good to go. And let's create our project. So the first project we're going to create is the API demo, like that. That's how you create a project on Turbo. And the project name is API demo. So Turbo, new API demo. This creates a Node Express project, a very standard Node Express. Okay. So the Turbo SDK is not like doing its own thing. It's just a sort of a proxy to Node Express. So it's not like you don't have to learn all this Turbo stuff. So go ahead and create that. CD into the API demo directory. And And since it's Node Express, you got to run the npm install, just like a regular Node Express project. Any really Node project, you got to run the npm install. So npm install to install all the dependencies, packages, whatever. Okay. This part makes sense? What we're doing here? Okay. This usually takes about a minute. So while that's going, head over to your Turbo account, and let's create the corresponding project on Turbo so we can deploy. Okay? So over here to the right, create a project with the same name, API demo, and just hit create. Good. And this is our sort of our project dashboard. Grab the app ID. This is all we really need, the app ID, which is our unique identifier to our project on the hosting environment. Okay. So copy that. Copy that. That's what I mean by grab it. Okay. So by now the install should be done. So go back to your terminal, and it's done for me. So we want to connect our local project to our Turbo remote. So we do Turbo app, and then paste in the app ID, and that then connects our local source code to our Turbo remote environment. And that's it. So the code is now connected. Okay. First thing we want to do is run the dev server to make sure everything looks good. Everything looks the way it should. So we do Turbo dev server. Yeah.
Can you say that one more time? The line of the Turbo app with that unique key.
Oh, right. So we have some source code in our project right now, right? The project has no way of knowing where to deploy until we connect it to our app.
Gotcha.
It connects it to our deployment environment, basically our servers.
Gotcha.
So we do Turbo dev server to run the project locally. This is basically just local hosts, right? And we should see this. So this is our project running through a Node Express environment on localhost 3000. So far, a very, very conventional Node Express experience. Okay. Good. The dev server does watch your files, so you can just leave it running if you want and do your edits, and it'll rerun if you want to, or you can relaunch it. It's all the same. Okay. So to turn off the server, you do Control-C. Good. And let's do a quick deploy to make sure it works on staging. And when it's done, it should give you a staging URL right here. Yep.
Mine says turbo login.
Oh, yeah. So you have to do turbo login and then enter your login credentials. I always forget that part. Just like Heroku login, same thing. And then do turbo and deploy again. And this time it should let you run the deploy. Okay. And once that all goes up, you should be provided a staging URL where you can see your project on the staging environment, the actual link. So if you head over to that, you should see your project running on staging. That's it. We got our project created, scaffolded, deployed on the internet. Let's all go home, call it a day. We all published a site. It's true, we did. Okay, are we good? Everyone good to go? All right, so great. All we've confirmed here is that the entire environment works. That's all we've done. Everything is successfully connected and working. Now we can begin our coding, right? So if we open up our project in Sublime or Atom or whatever you use, here you will see the project directory. It is as plain vanilla Node Express as I could make it. So the app.js is your Express entry point. We have our views, which is where our templates are rendered. It uses the Mustache templating engine. Is anyone not familiar with what that is? Okay, we'll go through all those concepts. So the routes are where the pages are loaded. The public directory are where your assets are stored. So let's go through the architecture of this project. So the app.js is where your app is configured, meaning where we determine what's the home page, what modules we're using, what routes are served, and things like that. In this particular scaffold, the home page is index.mustache, which is just an HTML page. That's it. Okay? Mustache is called a templating engine. You may have heard of other templating engines like Handlebars, Jinja for Python, whatever the Ruby on Rails default is, the %sign with the carrots. I'm sure there's a templating engine name for that. Those are all templating engines, right? What is a templating engine? It allows you to inject dynamic data into an HTML page using just regular objects, JSON objects in this case. So let's do that right now so you can see how it works. It's pretty straightforward once you do a couple quick examples. So that logic is dictated in the routes directory. So if you open up the routes directory, you'll see two files, index and API. Ignore the API one for now. We probably won't even use that tonight. But the index route is the route that serves our home page. Okay? Specifically, this one right here, line 8. This route is responsible for rendering, literally rendering our home page. Line 9 says res.render, right? Res stands for response. And render means literally what it sounds like, render. And the word index is referring to the index.mustache in the views directory. That's how that's connected. Okay? So let's go ahead and manipulate this route. Let's get rid of these other sample routes just to clean this up. Actually, let me do this. Okay. And then if you look here, you'll see what's called a JSON object with some key values. Only one key and one value, text, and then this is the dynamic data. What I'm going to do here is create another JSON object with the key value text and hello from WeWork. So I'm creating a data object here on line 7 with one key called text. And that data can then be injected into the template by virtue of the Mustache templating engine, right? So instead of all this down here on line 11, you see I remove that. And I'm going to replace it with my data object that I just wrote a second ago. You see that? And that's how you inject dynamic data into a template. This is called templating in Node Express. Okay? So now if I go back to my local host, rerun the dev server, if I reload the page, look closely. Oh, this is not the dev server. Here we go. Look closely at this text right here. You see that? Hello from WeWork. It's rendering the dynamic data that we injected into the template. The red text right here. You see that? So then that begs the question, how do I render it in the template itself? How do I actually render the dynamic data? Well, if I go to index.mustache right here in the views directory, you'll see that right here, that double curly brace where it says text, that's the dynamic data. You see that? And the word text is literally referring to the key, text. That's the connection. Okay? So if I, instead of welcome to Turbo, let's say hello, and then first name. You see that? I'm referencing a new key called first name, which doesn't exist yet, so it's going to show up empty, right? So if I go back to my index.js file, I can add another key called first name. And now that will show up in the template, hopefully. You see how that works? That's templating. That's the beauty of templating. So we're going to definitely use this tonight to access APIs and then render data dynamically. So if I reload the page now, hello LeBron. That makes sense? So if I add more to the data here, last name. So now I have another key, last name, that I can access inside the template, the Mustache template, wherever I want to. I can ignore it too if I want, obviously. But I now have more data available at my disposal on the actual render. So if I go here, I can do last name. That's it. Dynamic rendering on Node Express. This is very conventional Node Express rendering. This is how we render dynamic data. How'd that work out for you guys? You got that working? Good? Okay. Okay, so we can carry this much further, obviously. For example, inside the index, let's say we have another page we want to render. Index.js. We can set up another route to render a different page. Let's say we do router.get. And here, I've appended a special word after the hyphen. See that colon page? Here, I'm appending what's called a query, a path parameter, a parameter. So what that means is whatever word I enter after the slash represents the page I want to see. So that'll make more sense when we use it. So if I do this, var page equals rect.params.page. This key right here, params.page, comes from this path manipulation right there. And therefore, we can use that variable, that parameter, to conduct additional logic. I can dictate what page I want to see, the home page, the about page, whatever. So we're going to use that right now. So for now, what we're going to do is just return some JSON, just spitting the data right back to us. Okay, so here we're returning a JSON response, what's called JSON. Has anyone here not heard of JSON? Sorry?
My cousin's name is Jason.
Yeah. Okay, so we're just returning some raw JSON. We will be using a lot of JSON tonight because most APIs return JSON. So you will be getting very comfortable with JSON if you continue your programming studies. So here, now I can do /test, and I get that response. Page is test, right? I can do /hello, and it'll just return back to me whatever I entered in that slash, returning the path parameter right back to me. That gives us some additional logic. Now we can create a little bit more dynamic websites, right? So let's create a page now. So what we want to do next is turn off the server and go to the views directory because pages reside in the views directory, right? That's where they exist, right? So we want to create a page right now called Instagram. And what we're going to do on this page is render an Instagram feed based on a query parameter, okay? So go ahead and create that page, and you should see it pop up in the views directory. Go back to the root directory here, and then open up your index Mustache, and copy the entire thing and paste it into the Instagram Mustache just to get some initial content. We're going to remove about 95% of it. So let's paste that in. Just a quick copy and paste, nothing crazy. And then let's get rid of pretty much all of it. Something I said?
Yeah. Copy paste in the middle.
Yeah. Okay, and then inside this header, let's just say Instagram page. Okay, so now we have our template prepared for the Instagram feed, at least for now. So let's render this guy whenever we make a request for the Instagram page, right? So over here, going back to our index.js, we can do if page equals Instagram, we can render the Instagram page. Res.render Instagram. And for now, we'll pass in null for the data because we don't really have any data right now. So just pass in null. And so now we can load certain pages depending on the parameter passed into the URL path. So let's try it. So go back here, run the dev server. Head over to localhost. That still works. Do /Instagram, and here we go. So our page is properly loaded. Now we're all set. How are we doing? Everyone see that? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So people tend to be sure.
Why are you using null right there?
Oh, we're going to replace that in a minute, but right now we don't have any dynamic data, so we just pass in nothing. That's a temporary placeholder. We obviously want to populate it with data, which is what we're going to do, hopefully in the next 20 minutes.
Can you go back to the Instagram mustache?
Sure. Yep. Matt, can you do a picture of water?
Do what?
Picture of water.
I had to leave that HR/.
Oh, that's not a big deal. I just, yeah, whatever.
Something's not working.
Okay, so we want to make this even more dynamic, right? What we want to do is have it load a feed, an Instagram user feed, based on the username parameter. In other words, we need to know whose Instagram feed to load, is what I'm trying to say, right? So we want to add a query string parameter in order to do that. So here, what we want to do, for example, so here's my YMCA, right? So that's the username right there, right? We want to be able to do this. User equals username, right? We want to be able to do that and then parse that out and then render the content based on whatever is inserted there. That's called a query parameter, right? So we can grab the query parameter over here. Our user equals rec.query.user. And that will grab the query string parameter if it exists. Okay, we want to be a little bit cautious about this though. There might not be a user parameter, so if user equals null, Under such circumstance, we want to return an error message. So res.json. This is called validation. So we want to do some very basic validation. Please enter a user query parameter. So that it blocks it if the URL doesn't have that query string. Okay, so now I'm going to load the page without the user query string. I'm just going to remove it, and I see that error, which is a good human readable error saying you forgot this. That's your problem. Okay. However, going down here, if the user query string is there, we should inject that as dynamic data. So let's do var data equals user. Right, now we have some dynamic data we can inject into the template and render that any which way we want to. All right, so going back to the actual template, we can just say user equals and then the template like that. Thanks, man. Okay, so now we have that properly rendering, which means the data has been successfully captured.
Can you go back to the URL?
Sure.
Type in.
Okay, so now we have some real dynamic capability here, right? We have the username that we need to actually get data from Instagram. So now we're going to have to actually make that request. So before we do that, make sure this is properly rendering for you too.
Can you go back 1 second to the index object?
Sure. Make sure you have this over here, line 29, and make sure this is no longer null. If you look at my line 33, and it was null, but now I inject the data object. So make sure you catch that.
Oh.
Good? Great. So we're confirming that we're capturing the data that we need, right? Like we have successfully confirmed that the data we need to make the follow-up requests are available to us, right? And if they're not, we throw out an error message. We make sure that we don't send requests through that can't go through, okay? So now the question is, how do we actually make the request? So if you go to Instagram and like a username like this, and then append the following, question mark, underscore underscore a equals 1. This will render a JSON feed of that username. This is essentially an API call to Instagram's API. Not essentially, it is an API call to Instagram's API. So we are going to make this request via our site, our project. Okay? However, before we do that, oh, by the way, I'm using a Chrome plugin if you don't have this. JSON Chrome formatter. Just the first result here. That's the plugin I'm using to format the JSON. Okay, so just add that. If you go through this JSON, you'll see that the recent images are inside this media key right here, right? And then inside this nodes array, and then here is the actual metadata relating to each image from the feed. So if I click on this right here, that's one of the recent posts from that username. Right, with various sizes, so like 150, 320, 480, 640, and then so forth and so on. It's an array of images with all the relevant metadata. Obviously, when it was posted, the actual image URL, things like that. So here's another one, right? And then here's another one. So forth and so on. I think we can understand what's going on here, right? So we can then use this JSON on our end to parse out what we want and render on our service. Make sense? Let's go ahead and do that. So going back to here, right here is where we render the page, line 33, right? However, that's no longer going to work. It's premature. We need to make the Instagram request first and then render the page and populate the corresponding data, right? That has to happen, right? So that's the point at which we make the API call. So right here, make API call to that, where this value right here is the username. I think we can all figure that part out, right? So now the rest is sort of mechanics. How do we do that? How do we make that API call? So we're going to install a library who makes HTTP requests on our behalf via the server. And there are a couple popular libraries in NPM that does that. I use what's called SuperAgent. Other popular options are Axios, Fetch, and there's probably a couple others, but I'm a fan of SuperAgent. So let's go ahead and install SuperAgent, and that library, that module, makes HTTP requests via JavaScript.
What is the -s do?
Oh, save. That's a good question. So here, in the package.json, you see how it shows up right here?
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't do -s, that wouldn't happen. It stands for save. So. Question, yeah.
Just going back real quick to that __a=1
Yep.
query. Like, is that like a universal thing I can do in any like profile line?
Unless the profile is private. If the profile is private, it doesn't let you do that.
Oh, that's like like my personal accounts. I can just run that off my own.
Assuming your account's open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's like a universal like thing to use. Is that like a special?
It's what they call an undocumented API. So Instagram lets people use it. There's nothing illicit there. It's the same content you would see visually. So there's no private information. It's just rendering the same content in JSON form.
Right.
So I don't know if any of you guys are on Reddit. But if you go on a Reddit sub, like this, you can do the same thing. JSON form of that Reddit feed. It's the same content in JSON form. So it's not like you're seeing anything new anyway. You're just seeing the same data in a different configuration. So, okay, so we should have SuperAgent installed now. So we go to the top and we import that library so we can use it, obviously. And we let that guy make the request for us. Let's go ahead and do that. So before I do that, and make sure everyone has this.
Why do you prefer that over like Fetch or the other ones?
It's just what I'm used to. One of the things about JavaScript and Node Express and in general is there's such a massive plethora of libraries, and there's no like it's kind of like, you know how Ruby on Rails, it kind of conforms, it makes you conform to its standards. It's very opinionated. JavaScript is like the opposite of that, or specifically Node. It's like everyone has their own kind of preferred tools and whatnot. And I like this one. I'm not opposed to using Axios. I'll use other libraries when my client says we use this library. Then I do that. That's fine too. Okay, so here we have to make the request, right? So super agent. So here is a super agent get request. And right now we're going to hard code the URL. Just use we're going to hard code it to my YMCA. Everyone should do the same thing. The reason is because this is guaranteed to return data. Okay, so for now, we can sort of fix for any like weird edge cases by everyone doing the same thing. Once we confirm that, we can then render dynamic data. Okay? Sure.
Those methods like query set and then that's just specific to super agent?
Correct. And then we're going to pass in null for the query. We're setting a header. It's going to return JSON. And then the end is obviously the callback. So that takes error and response.
We do it now because we're hard coding it? Is that what you said? For the query?
Oh, we're just not going to pass in any query parameters. Just ever. So I probably should just remove that line altogether. Okay, line 35 is a standard JavaScript callback giving an error and a response. If the error object is populated, that means something went wrong. So we're hoping that's null. So we check for the error first. And if there is an error, we should send back some sort of error message. Hopefully we won't ever see this. But if something does go wrong, we do want to send back some message so we can decipher it. We can make sense out of it. Okay. And then now, well, down here on line 44, I'm now in the success block. That means everything went right. Right. So let's grab the data. That's going to be in the response.body. Sometimes it's in the response.text, though, so I'm just going to cover for both right here. And then for now, I'm just going to return the JSON, just basically return it raw back to the client side. And notice how I commented this out. We no longer want to do what we did before. We just want to return the JSON from the Instagram API just to make sure it worked. And let's cross our fingers and hope that it worked. Now here's the Instagram feed loading from my local host. You see that? So the important thing to take away here is that it's localhost 3000. It's my project loading the Instagram feed, which means we now have access to the data from Instagram. The request was successfully made and then rendered client side. So who also is seeing that? Please raise your hand.
Can you just go back to the
Okay.
index.json?
I'm going to pause the video and let's debug. Okay, so now we are seeing the data rendered from our local host, which means it's just confirming that we're successfully getting the data. That's all we're really doing here. But now that we're doing that, let's actually do some work with it. Let's parse out some of this stuff. Like, we don't need all of this data, right? We just need this array right here called nodes. Right, that's the image feed. So let's go ahead and parse some of this out. So we have a media key, which is a JSON object. which evidently has another key called nodes, which is the array of images. Let's go ahead and parse that. So we have data.media.nodes. So if I just render that, if I just sort of dig into the JSON and render that, it should only give me the array rather than all the other stuff around it. All right, so if I reload that from localhost, cannot read nodes of undefined. So let's try it again. So here we have, oh, I'm sorry, the top key is user, so I missed that guy, so my apologies. So we go to the top, data.user.media.nodes. So JSON parsing, obviously, is very detail-oriented. We got to be very careful with how we parse through our JSON. So, okay, so now we have the JSON rendering only the image feed, which is really all we want, right? Okay, so now we're digging through the JSON to really get what we need. So I'm going to parse this out as its own variable. Let's call it feed. And render that in here called feed. Now we have the JSON rendering in our own key called feed. So now we're doing some very slight manipulation to the JSON.
Do you let some code?
Yep, right here, right here.
So there used to be 3 returns and now there's just 1. Or, sorry, just 2.
I'm
There are
not,
still 3. Okay.
okay, and last but not least, we still have the username hard-coded, right? So let's make that dynamic now. Let's get rid of that. And let's inject our username from the query string. So let's get rid of that. And let's put in the user name from the query parameter. So it's dynamic. So it's not always rendering the same thing. We were just doing that to strip out the data and organize our data. So what that means is we can change the query parameter with a different username, and hopefully it'll render different data, hopefully. Does that make sense?
So this is how this is how you pass this in the super agent, the variable.
Which
user.
one? It's just a string. So I think it might make more sense if I create a separate string out of it like this. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but this might be easier to read.
Yeah, that plus user, I'm like,
Right.
okay.
Yep.
Does it play nice, like the super agent with the template strings?
Template strings? What do you mean?
Like when you do the backticks?
Oh, I think so. Try it.
I don't want to break it.
So now I'm going to go to another Instagram account. Instagram. Okay, so here's another Instagram account. And if I pass that through my local host, I see data from that Instagram account. And I can confirm that by just clicking on one of the images. And there's the most recent image from that account. So successfully capturing that data. So now we're really good to go. We can pass in dynamic data and render that. Okay. How are we doing with that?
Yeah, there.
So what we've done up to now is confirm that we've successfully captured the data, but there's still like a lot of data, right? Like this is a lot of stuff, most of which we actually just don't need, to be honest. What we're going to use are the actual image and the caption, and that's it. So we need to now parse a lot of this stuff out, clean it up, parse out only what we need, right? So here's the feed array, right? We have thumbnail source right here, which is basically the original image, the raw image, right? So the thumbnail source key right here can be parsed out, and then the caption key down here can be parsed out as well. And let's just use that for now, right? We don't want to do too much right now. So instead of just taking the entire feed and shoving it back, let's make a minor adjustment here. Let's instantiate the feed as an empty array, and then iterate through what Instagram returns to us and just pick out what we need. Okay? That way we can be much more discriminating about returning only the data that we want rather than like everything. So what do we want? We want the caption as well as the thumbnail underscore src. So let's go with const. What do we want to call it? Let's just call it P. Very poor naming convention, I know, but again, I'm just being kind of lazy right now. Image equals post equals post and then let's insert that into the you know what? Let's do this instead because I don't want to encourage bad habits. So this will, bless you, that'll bypass that problem so nobody can yell at me for bad variables. You guys see what I'm doing here? I'm just inserting into the feed array only the data that I want. Bless you. Which will make it much easier for us to reason about that data, so we don't have to like search, pick through just tons of JSON to get what we want. So you see our array now is much simpler, it's only giving us what we need. Image, caption, image, caption. Obviously you can pick out more if you want, that's up to you, right? And then we can just click on these, make sure everything looks right. And now we're really in a good position to use that data in our project. Okay, so right now we're parsing. Yep, question?
Is there any reason why you chose to use like the angle bracket and the string inside instead of say post dot?
Yeah, good question. I was just being super cautious because I wasn't even sure if this is going to work, but let's find out right now. It was a cautious move, but whatever, let's gamble. Solves that, so we're good to go. Okay, so now that we've really confirmed we have the data exactly the way we want it, now we can inject it into our template and use it in our template and render it, right? So instead of returning just raw JSON, let's render res.render the Instagram template with the data feed that we defined. And we can actually just fully get rid of this now. So now we're going to go back to rendering our template. It'll look like it did before, but that template will now have access to all this data, which means we can go into the template and use it to render all that data, which we'll do in a minute. But before we do so, if we go back to here, now I'm back to where we were before, which seems like we just took a step back. But this template now has a lot more data that we can use, more data at our disposal. So let's go ahead and do that. So I left this one open for a reason, this guy right here, so that we can refer to the JSON that's currently in the template. It's only one key, feed, which is an array. Okay. So what we can do, before I do this, is everyone with me? Is everyone seeing the same thing? We can go back to our Instagram.mustache, and we can loop through the array. So it's feed. So this syntax in Mustache, I believe it's Mustache, it might be handlebars, means we want to loop through the array called feed. And then we want to render whatever we want to render inside that. So for now, we're just going to render a div with an image tag. The image tag is inside the key called image. So image. Let's just do that for now. Let's just make sure that works. Now these are full-size, high-res images. So because I already know it's going to be too big, let's just go ahead and scale these down to 260. And let's make sure that that works first. Cool. So I'm seeing the feed from the selected Instagram user. So if I go back to the 14th Street YMCA, now I'm looking at the YMCA feed.
What did you set the width to? You said 240.
Whatever you want. 260 is what I went with, but you know.
Still some JSON.
Is everyone here comfortable with Bootstrap? No? Haven't used it yet. Okay, so I'll do a quick Bootstrap thing because although we got the feed working, it doesn't look quite that nice. So let's fix that.
No, that's lit.
I see the JSON for that name.
Right here.
Link the Instagram user scroll.
Oh, you still see the JSON. Okay, so what that means is you must be rendering it by mistake here. You see how I commented that out?
Yeah, that's the same thing. Yeah, I forgot the
Yeah.
comment.
Oh yeah, so
So this is a technique. This is the technique I'm using to load my meetups on my website. Right. So whenever I make a change on my meetup, I don't have to make corresponding changes on my website. Let's see here. Let's do some quick styling just because. So let's see how we're gonna do this. I'm going to put this above the row. And you see this class column 6, whatever. Let's get rid of that, as well as this down here. And we're going to make these divs their own columns. Let's do class, col, md3. So if my math is correct, we should have 4 images across horizontally. So it should be stacked in rows of 4. 4, then 4, then 4. Perfect. Better UI. I think this is a more pleasant user experience. And this is why I asked about Bootstrap. We're using Bootstrap Columns to create this effect.
Oh, we're setting that class. All right.
Mm-hmm. You gotta talk to my talent agency about taking pictures.
Sorry?
You gotta talk to my talent agency about taking pictures. My manager, yeah. Costs $5,000. Talk to Matt about that.
Seriously?
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
We'll take a donation.
It's not you.
All right, so I'm just doing some quick styling. I'm just being nitpicky here. It's not really important for the demo's sake, but I'm just getting some stuff in there. You don't have to do this if you don't want. I'm just waiting for people to finish debugging, essentially. Who has this working, by the way? Just raise your hand. Okay, so just let me know when you're ready. And then in the meantime, I'll just keep on styling stuff. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Little too advanced for us, but a few more months.
No problem. It'll be online, so. And then while I'm at it, I'm just going to throw in the caption. And that's just an extension of the templating, right? I just threw in the caption right there.
Can you do that one more time? I didn't
Yep.
see it.
It's right here. Because we decided to also parse out that element of the Instagram feed. Okay, so again, show of hands, who has this working? All right, so I'll pause the video and we'll debug. Okay, so how are we doing so far? Everyone got it working?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. So it's a good idea to test it with a couple other usernames, just so you're seeing different data, right? So here's my YMCA. If I change it to that, now I see different data, right? So it's working. This is successfully rendering. I threw in the caption there. I kind of did that real quick on my own. So if you don't have this showing up yet, make sure you get that working as well. And that means everything is properly showing up. When you take this home, I encourage you to actually render more data, right? So here on the original feed, there's quite a lot of data we have available to us, right? So we also have, the timestamp. This is a Unix timestamp, so we can convert that to a date stamp using JavaScript library for that. Caption, how many likes, right? There's more metadata we can decide to use, and that's a good exercise for you to do when you go home to get more experience parsing out JSON and rendering it, okay? So we're gonna close the book on that. If you guys have enough gas, we can do another one. Let's do a Foursquare feed. So here is a sample Foursquare API call, searching for a list of nearby venues by latitude, longitude. Here is a latitude, longitude. And here are my API keys. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass these keys over to you. So what you should do is join my Slack channel. So you should have gotten an email when you signed up for Turbo. It automatically sends you an invite to Slack. So go ahead and accept that, and then I'm going to Slack you this API call right now. I'll just do it in the general. So everyone sign up here. So whoever that is, you're now on. So I'm going to wait for everyone to get on here, and then I'll just paste it in there for now.
So you get the Slack invitation just when you sign up?
Correct. And whatever email you used to sign up, you should have gotten a Slack invitation in that email inbox. Check your spam if you don't see it. And there is a sample Foursquare API request using my API keys. Feel free to use it as much as you want. Okay, as soon as you grab that, let me know, because I'm going to take it down. Otherwise, a bunch of people on Slack are going to start messaging me. Now's not the time for that. Okay, so I know. Let me raise your hand when you have this, so I know when I can take it down. Let's give it a couple more minutes. Good. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and create another template to do Foursquare searches. So we're going to use the Foursquare API to search a list of nearby venues by like categories, so like food, fashion, whatever you want to search for nearby. Rather than Latin long coordinates, we'll just do like a name like New York City or 51st Street or whatever. So let's go back to our. I'm just making sure I didn't forget to record this. Let's go back to our views directory and create another template called Foursquare. Okay. Just like we did before, let's copy and paste from the Instagram mustache into the Foursquare mustache template. Let's change this to Foursquare page. And let's get rid of all of it. Let's just empty out the entire thing. So now we have another template sort of on standby, ready to render whatever we tell it to render. Okay? Everyone with me on that? So we go back to our index.js. And you see over here on my line 29, I have a specific case set up for Instagram. Let's just do the same thing for Foursquare. Okay, and just like we did before, let's just render the template and make sure only that works, right? So res.render. Just like we did before, we're just going to render the template as is before we make any requests or anything like that, and then we will then fill it in with data, Foursquare data. Okay, so let's go ahead and test that. Foursquare. Oh, so here, you see what happened? So I forgot that the Foursquare parameter request does not require a parameter, right? User parameter. So that's why we do these incremental step-by-step tests, right? Because it's so easy to make a bug like this that you want to catch it early. You see, so. I'm getting the vibe that this is most people in this room are more at the entry-level programmer stage. So a very, very, very common beginner mistake is to program way too much without testing, which is what I did not do just now. So I made a mistake here that I completely did not anticipate. I thought this would work. It did not work. So what I did was I caught the mistake right after I made it, so I can go ahead and fix it. Okay, you want to get into that habit. Otherwise, your life would become very difficult. Because if we had programmed all that Foursquare API stuff, that's another hour down the road, and then we probably didn't even know we made this mistake. So we want to get this conditional right here covered only inside the Instagram block. You see that? Because only the Instagram request requires a user parameter. Okay, so I'll do that again real quick. So these 6 or so lines right here are basically validating that there's a user query parameter in every single request. That's too much though. We only need it inside the Instagram request. So I'm cutting it from here, and I'm putting it inside the Instagram block. Makes sense? Because this is the Instagram's rule, not Foursquare's rule. So we run the conditional inside the Instagram code. And then we should now be able to render the Foursquare template as is, and which means we're good to go. So let me confirm that on my end, because there might be another mistake I didn't pick up on. So let me just make sure about that. Great. So here is the Foursquare template ready to go. I'm now ready to make API requests to Foursquare and do whatever I want to do. Okay, let's just go with the thumbs up, thumbs down communication here. So just let me know when you're ready, so I know. All right, so wait another minute or two, and then we'll move on.
I'm getting a confirmation page success page Foursquare.
Oh, because you need this return right here, line 22. Make sure you have that.
Yeah. Yeah, I have that return.
Okay, then somehow this conditional is not being satisfied in your case, so it might be a typo. Okay. So now that we're here, and confirm that the template is rendering, we can now make the Foursquare request. So do that in your browser just like we did before. You should have gotten this from Slack by now, so go ahead and make this request in your browser. We're going to tweak the parameters a little bit. We're not going to use this lat long parameter right here. You guys see what I've highlighted? That's the Foursquare search API based on latitude, longitude. We're not going to use that. Let's just use a regular human readable string like near New York City. So near New York. Okay. And then do an ampersand and then query pizza. And that should give us pizzerias in New York City. Okay. So how do I know even like what terms I can enter like that? So I looked up the Foursquare Developer API like literally just now, and I just figured out which one of these I'm going to use. Okay. So any good API has thorough documentation like this, and I just went through the list and I decided let's use this and let's use that. Okay, and there's plenty more options we can use. We're not going to get into today, but I just did near and then query. That's it. Obviously, we can add more if we want, but this is how you have to look at the documentation and make your determination based on that. Okay, so
Can you show me the URL?
yeah, right here. So now that we have successfully made that request directly to Foursquare, let's copy that URL. Okay. And head over to our Foursquare block and paste it in right here. Let's create a URL constant. I'm going to call it Endpoint. And just like we did before, let's make a super agent request using the exact same string, right? Because we've confirmed that this works. So we don't want to do any dynamic manipulation here. We're not ready for that. We want to just do a request literally as we did test it in the browser so that we can confirm we're getting the exact same results. Once we confirm that, we'll put in our dynamic data. Okay? So let's go back to super agent. Let's make a get request, pass in the endpoint. Takes a query, set, and this time we are going to use the query, okay? So the query object is really everything after the question mark. You see that? So the question mark afterwards is just a set of query parameters. We want to convert that to a JSON object. So we do the following. Const query v near query client ID client secret. Okay, so do you guys see how I stripped out the query string off the URL and I just converted it to a JSON object? This is definitely a better way to handle these requests. And that query JSON object right there is what gets passed into the query block right here. Query argument, excuse me. And then the accept is the same as before. Here we're just setting a header saying make sure it returns JSON. And then same as before, error and response. Do some quick error handling. So again, like before, we're hoping we never even see this error. And then assuming it works, we parse out the data, response, and again, I can never remember if it's body or text, so I'll just do both. And then I just do the response. And don't forget to remove this render over here. I went a little bit fast on that, but it's really just a repeat of the Instagram implementation.
Is it client secret instead of client service? Or do I have the wrong?
It's a secret right here, line 29. Is that what you're referring to?
Oh, secret, yeah.
So like before, like we did with the Instagram API, right now, if this is successful, it will just show us the same JSON as the Foursquare API. We're just proxying the request. So we shouldn't be looking at the template. Hopefully, we'll be looking at the JSON that Foursquare directly returned to us. Yes?
That line 45 and 46, you just wrote that?
Yes, and then don't forget to remove this over here, line 49. I'm sorry? The Instagram implementation. Okay, I haven't confirmed if this works on my end yet, so it's entirely possible I made a mistake, right? So let's go ahead and confirm that. So localhost Foursquare, and here is the Foursquare data rendering through my localhost. That means that the API request was successful. Okay, so same thing, thumbs up, thumbs down, let me know who's ready. Okay, we'll wait another minute or two. Yep.
Why did it response to body?
Oh, so the response is packaged inside the body parameter of the body object, or the text one. I just never remember which one, so I'm just being very lazy and just covering for both. Again, I'm just being very lazy, so it's going to be one or the other, so let's just find out.
What is that line doing specifically?
Oh, okay, great. So these double lines are saying if this is undefined, use this one instead.
Okay.
So it's one or the other, but I'm just going to test it right now because, again, I'm just showing some bad habits right now. So let me just test the body parameter. So it's the body object, body key. So, okay.
If both of them were undefined, it would just return undefined.
Yeah, that wouldn't happen though, because the only way that would happen is that the server itself is returning corrupted data. So that the server's down, your network connection is off.
Just in general, like if I use the or symbol to separate like two inputs.
It would be null. In general, it would be null. Okay, so here we hard-coded the request to New York and pizza, right? But that should be those should be the dynamic pieces. So let's do some validation here. If rec.query.near is null, don't let this request go through. So confirmation fail. Message missing near parameter. And then rec.query.query missing query parameter. So that way we can pass in the request parameters from here, thereby making dynamic requests to Foursquare, which is obviously better than static requests. Make sense? So now if I make the request, it's gonna send me an error saying, hey, we forgot some parameters, right? So if I do question mark near, and then this time I do Chicago, right? It's gonna say now I'm missing the query parameter, and I can do end query, and let's say bagels, right? Now I'm getting bagels in Chicago, Einstein bagels in Chicago. So our search query stuff is working. Good. Okay, so here is the code. And just make sure you have that. Make sure you cover for these two updates as well.
What'd you do in URL again? How did you?
Oh, sure. So a sample URL on localhost looks like this now. So I'll do it right here, like that. Line 37. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, all right. Give another minute or two.
Can you scroll down a little bit?
Sure.
I think I have a syntax error that I forgot. Parentheses.
Maybe picture of beer this time. Okay, so now we have the API routing through our end, which is good, just like we did before. Now it's time to parse it out, clean it up just like we did before, right? So we have the response and then the venues. That's really what we want is the venues key, right? So let's parse out the response. So let's do const results data response dot venues. Do you see what I'm parsing out there? I'm grabbing the venues key. So we're just parsing out the key that we care about, right? We're just getting to the level that we care about. So now we have only our array of venues. Nice. So now that's one step closer to what we want, right? Does everyone else have that? Okay. Every venue entry has quite a lot of metadata. We have the ID, which is obviously the database ID, the name, the contact information, the address, categories, thanks, and the website. Unfortunately, they don't have an image. So this can't be as like image rich as the Instagram one. We still have plenty of stuff we can use though. So how are we doing on this?
Can you go back to the code?
Yes. You should top it off, Matt, because they're going to close it in 5 minutes. Got to maintain our priorities, right? It's very important. Yeah. Yeah, question?
We're using line 61 data in the results. We're saying data.response. Is that the connection?
Correct. This is our list of venues right here, line 62.
Do you still mess around with Swift now, or?
I do, Swift 3, because every now and then I get inquiries for that. But by far, React Native. My last 2 iOS contracts have been React Native. So they didn't even ask for my Swift background. One in particular was a Swift conversion. So it was a Swift project that they wanted to convert into React Native. So I was uniquely positioned for that because I'm good at Swift and React Native. So that pretty much cinched the job for me. Like they're like, you can bridge that gap. So it's a good time to be a programmer because things are centralizing. So if you just learn React, Redux, and React Native, you're covering a lot of bases.
Yeah.
So one of my former students who's working on a big contract right now as an iOS dev does not know any Swift. It's all React Native. And so he learned React Redux through one of my courses. And then I shifted one of my clients who is a pure React Native project. But he's a de facto iOS developer without knowing any Swift. So strategically, it was the right play. So.
You think native web development, native like mobile development is like out the window?
It's a good question. I get that question a lot. There's always going to be a room for Swift and native development. The question is room where, right? So Swift and iOS native has been around for maybe like 9 years now, 8 years. So the people who can do Swift at that level are people like me. People have been doing it for almost a decade. Right? I'm on year 7 of this stuff, right? So if I'm going to get a job for Swift, that's because some company like Uber needs a really, really good Swift developer to operate at that level where I can come in as a senior dev on Swift and just go through their code, right? If you're entry level on Swift, you're going to have a really hard time because the market is mature, right? So there are many people like me. There are many more people like me than there were 5 years ago when I started out. So it's just simple market dynamics. In 2012, how many iOS native developers even literally existed, just empirically speaking? Right? Not that many, because it was probably 3 years old at that point. And that's exactly why I made that decision. So today, we're looking at 7, 8 years or whatever it is, which means you're entering that mature market. Well, luckily right now, React Redux, that dynamic is sort of happening all over again. So you can learn React Redux and React Native and still have a competitive edge in the marketplace because that market hasn't quite matured yet. It's getting there fast, but as I estimate, there's probably another 12 to 18 months before it kind of reaches equilibrium. So you can be an entry-level React Redux dev if you're any good and charge higher than entry-level rates. And I see that all the time. So like when I was starting out in 2012 as iOS, I'd never worked professionally as a programmer before. So what would you expect I charged by the hour? $25, $30? I did not. I charged $100 because the supply and demand was there. The demand was on my side. The supply was very tight, right? And again, that was the correct estimation. That dynamic no longer exists in iOS, but it does in React and Redux. It does. Not quite that extreme, but it's still there. And I think it'll be there for another 12, 18 months.
What do you project for the future as far as, or are you still testing the market now to kind of see what 2018 where you kind of want to fit in, or you haven't even thought about it?
Well, I don't really test the market per se. I just respond to the market. So like whenever I get inquiries from clients and people who need like project dev work, which happens about once a week, maybe a couple times a month, like 3 times a month or so. It's just based on what they want.
Okay.
It's like all the Angular requests, those are gone.
All right.
Like I'm never getting any more Angular requests. That was Angular for me was 2014, 2015. Like that's over, right? I'm getting all React Redux now and React Native. So the market has spoken quite clearly to me at least. So I know what where I should be.
Makes sense.
Let's see here. Okay, so here is our API. Let me just make sure I'm recording this. All right, I am. Let's do what we did before. Let's parse out like a lot of the stuff. Let's remove a lot of stuff we're not going to use. So let's not use the No, maybe we should use the contact. We definitely want the name, location. All right, so let's do that. Let's go through this like we did before. So let's do this. Let's do Can you guys see how I'm kind of repeating the steps we did before, right? And then in here, we can now sort of pick out what pieces we need. So we want the name, we want the contact, name, contact, location. Let's ignore categories, verify, let's ignore all that, URL. And that's good enough. So name, contact, and URL. Okay. So.
Question. Actually.
Yep.
Is there anything one of these for each not map to it? What is screen look like?
It'll come back in 5 seconds. I just like for each better.
Yeah. Just,
Contact. Okay, so I don't think there's an image in here, unfortunately. It would be nice if there were. Yeah, it's not. Okay. Okay, so we're just picking out the pieces that we want, right? Just like we did before. We're just extracting the data that we want.
So I might have missed this. We're rendering like the results.
Oh, I haven't tested it yet. So let's test it right now. Let's see what happens. So it's possible I made a mistake. So now we're saying sort of like a cleaned up list, right? It'll make it much easier for us to actually inject it into the template, make our life easier. Let's keep on testing, right? So instead of Chicago, let's try Miami. Right? Good.
Oh,
I guess they don't like bagels in Miami. Let's try coffee.
Yeah, that's more. Bagels in Miami is not bagels. Coffee, though, definitely. Oh,
Okay. So it's working, right? We're getting the data that we want. We parsed it out. Everything's working the way we want it to work. So now we can use the data on the actual rendering. guys good? Not going? All right.
Don't want that to waste.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I work with it.
Okay. So we have our search query going through Foursquare successfully, so we're good on that. And parsing out only the information that we want, so it's nice and clean, giving us what we need. So now it's time to inject this into our template. So then here, we want to render the Foursquare template with the results. And we no longer want that, right? Because we're done with it. It's served its purpose, so we're done with that. And now we can move on to injecting the data into the template. So now, do not reload this page because we actually want to reference it in a few minutes. So just open another tab and reload it over here. Now we're back to where we were before, but the template now has more data. Right? We now have a lot more data available to it. So we're going to use this as our reference. We have a results key that we can iterate through and then parse out whatever data we want from here. So going into the Foursquare template, we can do, let's do a, let's see here, div class call MD. Let's go with column 8. Call MD. Okay. And let's render this in a table, I guess. So these rows, TR stands for table row. These rows are what's going to render each individual venue, right? So the venue key is stored inside the results key of the data, right? So what we want to do is create the iteration there. Do you see that? So we do results. And now we are iterating through the results list that we injected into the template, as per the Mustache templating syntax. So let's start simple. Let's only start with the name just to make sure that that's showing up. And then once we confirm that, we can render everything else. Look at that, all the names. Good, and then if we change the search filters, let's try pizza, we get pizzerias in Miami.
Terrible pizza in Miami.
I've never actually been to Miami. So.
Never? Gotta go. It's great.
I was thinking about it.
Yeah. Can't beat the weather. Like I lived out there for 2 years.
That's what you were saying about contract devs can just travel the world. Is what you were saying. That's true, and I've never taken advantage of that.
Wait, that's the best part of it, though.
I program my apartment. Like I just stay home all day. Okay, so now we've successfully confirmed that the data is rendering. Now, this is also why I left the, oh damn it, I didn't move it. Here we go. Okay. So here, we can still refer to this to see what information we have, right? We have the contact info, the Twitter handle if we want to use that, and the URL. So all of these should have a URL. So let's do this real quick. Well, actually, before I just plow ahead, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. Who has this working? All right, so we got some people debugging. Let me just pause this. Okay, so we have this successfully rendering the name, which means we have access to all the data, right? So let's go ahead and parse some more of it out. Contact and then formatted phone. Contact and then formatted phone. And then URL. Let's see how that looks. Okay, it's rendering. Obviously, it doesn't look very nice, but it's rendering. So now we'll fix the formatting, but this is good that it's rendering. So let's go ahead and fix the formatting. But before I get to that, make sure you guys have this. Yeah, there's more here. I'm still very proud to show some of my best work. But when you click on this, see that? Now watch this. When you pull down, look what happens. See that? None of that's default. I'm going to code all in, and then when I let go, there's the image. So now look at this. When you scroll up, look what happens. See that? So you see how it fades out?
Great.
Look at the blurriness on the back. The
Is this
blur.
JavaScript?
No, this is Swift. I haven't done any real Swift work in a couple of years. It's pretty much where I left off. But then React Native came in. It's all React Native now.
Is there still that kind of speed difference between a native and React Native, like to get stuff done?
I'm as good on both. So like my acumen on both are pretty equal. So like if you're a React Native developer and trying to learn Swift, good luck. You're gonna take forever on that.
Okay.
But I learned Swift first, right? Like I did Swift for like 5 years before React came around. So like, or Objective-C then Swift. So
Okay.
I was positioned uniquely to take advantage of that.
I think it's probably best to try to focus on the visual design.
Exactly. Well, for my line of work. So as a contractor, that is hands down the best move you can make.
Yeah. For a contractor, it makes sense.
If you're looking at like Google and stuff like that, that's a different story. But for what I do, yes, that's my audience responds to certain things, and that's one of them. So.
Do you enjoy CSS, or is it just part of the game?
I don't hate it. I like making money.
Okay.
Like whatever pays, and I'll do it.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not creative, like when it comes to that stuff. Like I see some really beautiful things, I'm like, I wouldn't even think of.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I have a lot of pride in my work. There's no doubt about that. I am a professional. I'm very proud of what I put out there, and I take a lot of pride in that. But I do it for economic reasons.
Yeah.
So to that effect, it's I'm happy doing. I'm glad that I enjoy what I do.
Okay.
It's sort of like a lucky consequence. So, where are we? Oh, I was recording all that. I thought this was on pause. All right. How are we on this? Are we good?
Okay, we were good.
Okay. So let's add some quick styling now. So name, phone, and website. The website should be an actual link, right? So we should do a anchor tag for that. We want that to open a separate page. And then just insert the URL in the target href as well. I'm going to give this a style color of red because that tends to sort of indicate that this is a hyperlink. And then we do have Bootstrap, so we can use Bootstrap classes, right? So we have a table, then table striped. It won't be gorgeous, but it'll give us some minimal UI that we can get started with right away. It's something. I'm going to restore the background to white here. And then over here, I'm going to do background and then border. I'm just doing some freestyling here. I'm just adding some basic stuff to make it look nicer. It's a little bit better, right? And then okay. So I just threw in some quick styling. Nothing, no like real programming here. Just give it some aesthetic styling, so it doesn't look terrible. I think I'm going to remove this offset. All right. And if you have that working, then what you want to do is modify the URL to do other searches, just to make sure it's working dynamically, right? That makes it more useful. So I'll do that real quick. So let's try coffee in New York. Cool. So we're good to go on that.
What is speed?
Sorry?
Speed?
Where do you see that?
12.
Oh, T head. So the table has a head and a body. So right here, you see these header? That's the T head. Or table head, I guess, is the better way to say that. Okay, and then one last test. These URLs are connected, right? So if I click on this, it should take me to the website of that specific coffee shop. Right, creating a little bit more interactive site. You guys got that working? Thumbs up, thumbs down, and who has? Oh wow, great, good, great percentage. Okay, so last but not least, because it doesn't matter if it doesn't work live, right? Let's send all this up to the staging environment and try it on staging and make sure everything works up there. So here's my staging link. So instead of localhost, I can now insert the staging link and test it over there. And there it is on live. And everything worked. And let's try bagels in New York. And there we go. So everyone else should deploy as well. Just make sure it works on staging, and that's pretty much it.
I'm sorry, how did you do that?
Oh, yep, it's right here in your terminal. Make sure you're at the root level and you do turbo deploy. Correct, and then don't forget to append the paths or like /Foursquare, question mark, whatever. Don't forget all that stuff.